Hello, everybody. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Ana María Caballero, and I am a Colombian-American poet and artist. I have been writing and publishing for many, many years. I've written a book of poetry in Spanish called Entre Domingo y Domingo, via which I became the first woman to win Colombia's national Jose Manuel Arango Poetry Prize. The rights to this book were recently acquired and re-released via a Spanish publishing house called Valparaíso Ediciones. I've published 2 chapbooks in English, and my first nonfiction manuscript called A Petit Mal, which won the 2020 International Beverly Award, is coming out in May in the US, but will be launched at the London Book Fair in 2 weeks. And then I have a poetry collection called Mammal, which is the recipient of the Steel Toe Books Poetry Prize and a finalist for the Vassar Miller University of Texas Prize, and it's coming out in spring. All this to say, I know traditional publishing. I have published traditionally and worked very hard to do so for many, many years, for 2 decades. And I always felt this world was lacking, to be honest. My work is rooted in honesty, in brutal honesty, and straightforward delivery of verse. And that is how this panel will also be delivered. I worked for many years to get a poem published. I don't know how many of you are poets or writers and are familiar with the way it works, but usually you pay to have a literary journal read your work. And then it could take up to a year to get an answer. And when you do get an affirmative, a positive answer, it's really exciting. But at the same time, you're not really sure who's going to engage with your work. So, you're building sort of this street cred in the traditional publishing world by getting these credits, right? You're building a CV. That's how it works. And so, I have a CV of all my published work, of all the prizes, of all these things, but you don't really know who's reading your work. You don't really know who's responding to it, who's gaining from it. Literary journals are usually these volunteer-run operations. God bless their souls. I love books. I love literary journals. This is not to say that I don't think this work is absolutely crucial and necessary in the world. I'm just saying that for me personally, it always felt anticlimactic. It was kind of like, okay, so I got published, I worked so hard, and now what, right? Like, how does the work live after that? And you can give poetry readings, but at poetry readings, to be honest, you're speaking mostly to the choir. It's mostly poets reading other poets and poets going to other poetry readings. So I was turning my poems into very simple spoken word animations. I believe voice is very, very important. The style of a painter is what defines the way that they express themselves. In poetry, we call it voice. The voice of T.S. Eliot, the voice of Louise Glick. It's their style. And I feel that voice can be very much intimately linked to our voices, to our real voices. There's few things that can reveal ourselves. Do you think you can close the door? I'm so sorry. Please? Sorry. Thank you. So I don't think there's anything as intimate as our voices. Perhaps our eyes, right, reveal so much about us. And so I was turning my poems into these really simple spoken word animations on social media. And when I read about Web3, I felt very deeply in my bones that this was what was waiting for me very personally and for other poets that I knew. One of my mentors, who's this icon in poetry world, Denise Duhamel, always said to me, we were taught to think of the poem as the reward. We were told, get a job to support your writing habit, because poets cannot really transact their verse. Of course, you buy poetry books and it's so exciting to buy them and own them and love them and read them and annotate them, but you can buy a book for $14 with 50 poems that could represent the life's work of a poet, and that's not really going to add up to a sustainable life for them. So poets teach, poets give, presentations, they do workshops or have other jobs. And sometimes we confuse and confound teaching poetry with writing poetry. Another one of my mentors, Campbell McGrath, who's a Pulitzer Prize finalist poet, an amazing author. I have a day job, and I was like, Campbell, do you feel that that's not being true to the craft? And he's like, teaching is just another job. So it's really important, I think, to understand that poetry, even if you get to the top of your craft, it's very, very difficult, near impossible, to make a living from it. If you are the top screenwriter, the top potter, the top glassblower, the top sculptor, painter, you can hope to make a living from your craft. You truly can. But you can't from poetry. And for me, that problem lacked in logistics. Poetry had a logistical problem, a transactability problem, which the blockchain solves. So there is now a renewed interest in digital art thanks to the transactability that blockchain affords. My digital artist friend said, before when a collector picked up my work, I would just hand them a really nice box with a USB in it. But now I don't have to do that anymore. And the way that we're engaging with digital poetry and digital art is exactly the same. There is no difference. You go to a museum, you go to an NFT event, you go to a gallery, you're on your phone, you're on your laptop, you store in a digital wallet, an MP4 animation, a JPEG, the file format is absolutely the same. We now can have a seat at the art table, which means poets can transact their verse in a way that reflects their contribution to culture. And it's not just about the monetary side of it too. It's about honoring a craft. It's about the respect. I entered the space with the idea to found a digital poetry gallery called the Verse, which I ended up founding with 2 other women writers in the space. And our mission is to onboard traditional poets. We pair them with digital artists who have Twitter accounts, who know the lingo, who have, a captive audience, so that these verses can transact, can find homes. And I'll tell you a story that I always like to tell when I speak about this, which to me says it all. So Campbell McGrath, again, the same person that I just mentioned, he's, Pulitzer Prize finalist, has published 12 books of poetry that are all iconic. And I asked him to give us a poem. So he gave us a poem, and we paired him with Rob Niss, who's this really well-known digital artist who sells really, really well. And when the poem sold, and it sold well, and I said, Campbell, ready? Did you set up your crypto wallet? Do you need help? Do you want ETH, PayPal? I'm trying to be very flexible with poets because we want to get them on, right? We don't want to make this harder. And he had actually set up a crypto wallet. And when I told him how much I was going to transfer, he's like, that doesn't seem fair, Anna. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I didn't do any of the work. And I said, what do you mean? You have been doing the work for 50 years. You deserve this and more. So it's even like within ourselves as poets, changing that mentality to say this has currency. This has agency. And the word transactability for me is an important word. When we transact, we share, we give, we receive, we sell, but we assign value. We're saying this has value. So I think that the ability to collect poetry is going to prove revolutionary. I really believe that. I think that more and more poets will come onto the NFT space. And it's not even the NFT space. For me, it's digital art. It's digital art. They're going to enter the art world to present their poems as art. And they're going to not only find an engaged, active community that will respond to them when they publish their verse. Instead of not knowing how people read or didn't read or receive their work, they will be able to absolutely know what the reactions were. They will also be able to exhibit their verse. And part of what I would love the most at the Verse is sending pictures to these poets saying, hey, look at your poem in Paris. Look at your poem at Unit London, where we exhibited 12 poems during Freeze London when the gallery flew us out to deliver a poetry reading and exhibition at one of London's top galleries. Here you go. This is your poem on display next to painters who are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, because your work matters just as much. So this is all about changing the way we think and view and regard verse. And not only poetry in English, we're also working really hard to onboard poets who are working in Spanish. There's a concurrent conference going on right now called Proof of People, which is happening in Brooklyn. And we have an exhibition of 10 poems in Spanish by poets who are all new to the blockchain, paired with digital artists. We applied for funding, received it, hired a Cuban art historian to perform the curation, write a curatorial statement for the collection as a whole, and they're all poems written by women in Spanish, poems of protest. It's called Poesía de Protesta. And today we're on the front page of object.com, and it's exhibited at Proof of People. It's going to NFT Show Europe. And I mean, I know it's going to keep going on. I know it will be shown. And these poets are so excited. I mean, at the end of the day, they almost don't even care about, the Tezos or the ETH. It's getting their work shown in these places and having people engage with them, and also collaborating with world-renowned artists. And that experience, for me personally, that I collaborate plentifully, is really, really rewarding. Another aspect I wanted to speak about today, okay, sorry, we have to wrap it up, is books. So an ebook is absolutely the same thing as an NFT book. Think about it, except now you know who bought your book. How long before J.K. Rowling is going to start selling NFT books to 13-year-olds? Because I think the publishing world should start with kids, with young adults who get this and who will be engaged and who will buy things. How long before you do that? So I published a book called Tryst. It's a collection of short stories with Alexandria Labs. It's a new Web3 publisher. And we sold out in 48 hours. We had Keith Grossman, the CEO of Time, buying editions. I know exactly who bought my books, the first edition. Now I can produce a second edition, and I can produce prints and take them to the book fairs and have NFTs embedded in the prints and know exactly who owns my book. This is power. This is choice for authors, and I think this is the future of publishing. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you.